All right, cool, guys. Thank you very much, Rob, and happy birthday to yourself and to Full Spectrum Universe. It's been a fantastic year, and looking forward to collaborating and working with you in the coming years. This presentation that I'm doing is called The Root Races of Humanity, and we're going to be looking back at this form of human that we have today, because there's been several different types of human species that have existed on this planet in the past, I would say billion to 2 billion years, but we're not going to concentrate.
Sorry to jump in real quick. You're breaking up a little bit, Omar. I don't know what's happening, but if you want to start again, it's like clicking really bad. It's hard to hear you.
How's that?
Much better. Perfect. All right, I'm getting out again. Sorry about that.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thanks, buddy. All right, thank you very much, Rob, and to Full Spectrum Universe. Happy birthday to you guys, and looking forward to collaborating and working on many other events and things like that in the coming future. The presentation that I'm going to be talking about today are the root races of humanity, and the aspect that I'm going to touch on today is just going to be this form of human which we have had in the past 175 million years. But of course, there's been other humans that have lived on this planet for billions and billions of years, which have been a different form of a human, but pretty much the same thing. So this presentation here is going to be the discovery of truth about humanity, and a little bit about myself. My name is Omar, and I'm the host at a streamcast called Watchers Talk. You guys may know it, or you may not know it, but check it out on YouTube. Okay. So before we get into it, the periods of the great root races are divided from each other by great convolutions of nature and by great geological changes. Every root race is separated by catastrophe, cataclysm, the basis of historical foundations of the fables woven later on into the religious fabrics of every people, whether civilized, savage, under the names of deluges, showers of fire, great floods, and the like. The time span applied to the root race is considerable. For instance, the fifth, according to theosophical records, covered the years 10,000 BCE to 3000 BCE in the right-hand megalithic cultures, and 3000 BCE to 2400 CE, current era, in left-brain modern cultures. There are 7 root races, or evolutionary cycles, through which humanity evolves. Each root race is divided into 7 minor cycles called the subraces, which are again subdivided into 7 branch or family races. These subdivisions are related to the modern concept of races and ethnicities. We are presently at the 5th stage, referred to as the Aryans. Aryans, the word means noble in Sanskrit. Now, let's not allow the degenerates of World War II to ruin the word Aryan, because they've just pretty much hijacked it and used it for their own in a negative light. But the actual term Aryans means noble. The Indo-European nomadic tribesmen were a warlike race of horsemen that moved into India and west to the Near East and West Europe. Historians argue that they got to Europe, they destroyed the peace-loving earth, wisdom, pagan, matriarchal societies, and replaced them with warlike sky gods, worshipping patriarchal societies such as we still have today. Because today we're worshipping really the sky beings, the people that came and visited us thousands of years ago, or even they're known as the ancient aliens or the ancient astronaut theories. Now, as you can see on the chart here, the first root race was called Polarian, which existed 150 million years ago up to 70 million years ago. Now, the Polarian root race, actually, before I get into that, I'll give you guys the second one. The Hyperborean root race lived from 79 million years ago to 27 million years ago. And then we had the Lemurian root race, which you guys, I'm sure, are pretty familiar of, which was from 38 million years ago up until about 4 million years ago. And then from that arose the Atlantean root race, which existed from 18.5 million years ago to about 9,564 years BC. Now, the current root race that we're in is known as the Aryan root race, which began about 404 million years ago to about 425,000 CE, which means that we're going to be in this stage for quite a little bit longer. And then we have the sixth root race, which has not come yet. And then, of course, the seventh root race, which will come from the sixth root race, which we will get into here in a little bit. Now, let's take a chronological perspective of history based on ancient sources unrecognized by the majority with limited tools at the disposal of modern science. History has been abbreviated into a narrow band that does not sufficiently explain the vast time periods needed to evolve the current human form and human consciousness. Deep in our racial memory or collective consciousness lurks the legends and myths of lands and continents that once existed, such as Lemuria and Atlantis. Fabulous stories abound of advanced cultures with their arts and technologies that have risen to great heights and then fallen back into the dust of history once again. Now, not a lot of these land masses have just simply disappeared. Either they've gone into the ocean and buried, or they're just simply gone because of catastrophes that happen when there's a change in between one root race and the next root race. Now, we have records of this. I believe they're called the extinction level charts. Now, the extinction level charts happen quite periodically, and it happens kind of like clockwork. If it happened 36 million years ago, then it will happen again 36 million years in that cycle. We have been conditioned by thousands of years of wrong thinking, religious propaganda, and lack of spiritual education, and overdeveloped concrete mind of humanity in this fifth root race is a particular liability in that it does not recognize the subtle so easy. Only that which is tangible, history, with its many evidences of past civilizations, is entangled and confused state. Humanity's approach to our past has imposed upon itself the limitations of dogmatic science and theology, ignoring the ancient traditions and that hold the keys to many of these riddles. Now, as I was saying earlier, our band or our perception of our history is quite narrow, because we've come to an understanding, or we've come to believe that humans have only been around for 5,000 or 10,000 years, either through religious propaganda or through science propaganda, which is actually really not true. Humanity goes back far back to 175 million years. But in this concrete mind that we're in, we either need to have scientific proof, or we need to be able to see it, or we need to be able to touch it in order for it to be real. And if we can't see it or sense it or smell it, then it must not be real, and it did not exist, which is a false thinking in its own right. Now, Hindu tradition is the oldest of our current races in the Puranas. The meaning and chronological order is very clear. We can count generation of the Manus and their series of incarnations as heroes in the old stories, the man who sets the tone and type of any given race in terms of its evolutionary goal. The ancient book of Manu gives a complete narrative of creation with the chronology of the divine ages of the heroes through the appearance of man on earth. Now, what is a Manu? Manu is pretty much same as like a Messiah, a Jesus Christ, a Moses, Adam and Eve, things like that. So a Manu is someone who is a spiritual being that incarnates on earth and then gives guidance to mankind in order for them to achieve their higher spiritual awareness and to become, to have the earth at a maximum evolutionary, evolution. I guess that would be the word. But that's kind of what Manu is. A Manu is, a Messiah, or sent by a higher spiritual being. Every single culture on the earth has one. Christianity has it, Islam has it, pagans had it, the Hindus had it, the Chinese have it. Pretty much everyone has had some type of a patriarch or a Manu. Likewise, in the Egyptian tradition, and all the list of past kings were recorded carefully, documenting races and sub-races, reaching right back into ancient Atlantean and Lemurian history. The most recent references to our current fifth race also comes to us from the Old Testament, where the history of all human races is contained in the first 6 chapters of Genesis. Genesis, from chapter 4, verse 16 through to the end of the 5th chapter, gives purely historical facts taken word for word from the secret book of Numbers in the great Oriental Kabbalah. The patriarchs of the Old Testament, such as Adam, Cain, and Seth, are the same as the Hindu Manus who set the tone, impulse, and purpose for each evolution in the root race, sub-races, and branch races. The book of Revelations, chapter 17, verse 10, has preserved a tradition that speaks of the 7 races, where there are 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. This passage refers to the 5 root races that have elapsed, including our 5th root race that is almost finished. That which is not yet come refers to the coming 6th and 7th root races. The ancient Greek tradition was also a repository of the ageless wisdom encoded throughout its wonderful and deeply evocative mythology. The Greek allegories give to Atlas 7 daughters representing the 7 sub-races of Atlantis. These daughters are the mothers of famous heroes, the founders of many nations and cities. Astronomically, Atlas' daughters are the 7 Pleiades. The 2 are connected with nations whose destinies are shaped by the past events of their early lives according to universal karmic law. In the Greek traditions, the root races are divided into the golden, silver, bronze, and iron ages, and have an identical correspondence to the Hindu Yuga cycles, such as the Kali and Satya Yuga, which were coming out of the Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga just means the black age, the very dense age, and we're just snapping out of that now, and we're going into a different Yuga cycle, which is going to be of higher consciousness, which in turn means that we're going into the 6th root race, which is going to be more clairvoyant and more etherical than what we currently are. The 3 one-eyed giants of Greek mythology are a reference to the last subrace of the Lemurian root race. Hence, we can see the sources of the ageless wisdom or perennial philosophy that lay hid in universal mythology and religion. The same or similar stories are told in all cultures, indicating the consistency and veracity of these ancient stories within the collective consciousness of humanity. Mythology is one of the great keys to studying the mysteries, because the mysteries are encoded in mythology. Now, we have stories that are being told all over the world which kind of resonate and fit along with other stories, which, these cultures are separated by thousands of miles, and we're told that these people had no contact with one another, but yet they all seem to have the same mythological stories of sub-races, root races, and previous civilization, ancient alien contact, alien help, spiritual help, things like that. So if they're all speaking the same thing, then that must mean that there's some truth to the matter. Now, our current 5th root race, resonant with 5, the number of mind, there has been achieved a perfection, refinement, and quintessential expression of the concrete mind. Although this has brought many benefits in science and technology, its shadow expression via the critical mind tends to be separative at the expense of the love principle. So what's happening in this 5th root race, the one that we're coming to an end, is that we're really, bound to science and the 5 senses. If I can feel it, touch it, and smell it, it must be real. If not, then it can't be real. And what's that come at is the price of love, because we've given up on love and really have concentrated our mind and our efforts and energy on science more so than in love and mythological stories, which we should be investigating to learn deeper from. The lower mind only functions through the 5 tangible senses. In the coming Aquarian cycle, the secret science will blend more fully with mainstream science. The 6th sense, or intuition, is in its early stage of development. In this imminent 6th root race, hence perception of the more subtle aspects of human evolution, such as the aura, chakras, and the invisible forces behind nature, is still limited, unrecognized, and unrealized by the majority. As you guys may know, it's only recently that a lot of us are becoming spiritual and beginning to understand our colors of our aura, our torus, our magnetic field, our conscious field, and also our chakras. We're beginning to learn the functions of those. And this is in the early stages of it now. Like maybe 50 years ago, none of this was really happening. And then now, because we're getting closer and closer to the 6th root race, that a lot of these traits are coming out in us, and a lot of us are beginning to understand. But unfortunately, majority of the population out there still doesn't recognize any of this. If you were to walk up to somebody on the street and ask them about chakras or chakras, chakras, I doubt that a majority of the population would even understand what a chakra is, never mind the labels of each chakra. Within each root race are 7 subraces, and within each subrace are 7 branch races. 7 times 7 times 7 equals 343 races, all with their allotted cycles, providing a highly diversified human expression throughout the ages. The branch races in their turn give birth to the nations. Hence, the nations that come and go are the leaves upon this tree of life. They have their autumns and springs and constitute the shortest cycles of a few thousand years. The smaller branches that support the leaves are the branch races, and the cycles that correspond to a 26,000-year processional cycle that embodies branches embody the much larger cycle of the sub-races. The trunk of the tree represents the larger cycle embodied by the root race. God, it's hot in here. Holy Jesus, excuse me. The root race started about 150 million years ago during the latter part of the immense cycle. The first 2.5 human races were in subtle or etheric realm and gradually evolved into a physical form with skin and bones. In the middle of the third root race of Lemuria, human bodies were enormous in those times, but the development of the mental principle became smaller and more refined. So what that really means is that for the first, I would say 100 million years to maybe 90 million years, humanity was etherical, meaning that we were in a state of a dream world where we didn't have a physical body. We were gelatinous, we were a light body, and we existed like that for millions and millions of years, meaning we didn't have any bones, we didn't have any organs, we didn't have any hair, things like that. It was only in the third or in the Lemurian subrace or the root race that we really began to form the bodies, the physical bodies that we have today: bones, hair, skin, organs, etc., and even eyes. We'll get into the eyes here in a little bit. Individualization period occurred in the third branch race of the third subrace of the third root race, Lemuria, expressed as 333, not on this chart. The number 3 relates to the universal mother who births all forms. The individualization process started 21.6 million years ago. The chronology of the secret sciences that pinpoints the death of the dinosaurs after a few million years, the individualization process for various groupings of humans culminated 18.6 million years ago, with the final registering of this spark of mind consciousness was not instantaneously received like turning on a light switch. Group of souls needed to special attention by the guides of the races in this 3 million year period to fan their spark into a flame. So what that really means is that when humanity first took this physical form, the consciousness that was inserted into our mind, the spark of consciousness, really didn't take hold very quickly, and thus Manus or patriarchs were sent here to Earth to give us a helping hand and to guide us into a higher form of consciousness, and then so that we can begin to learn about our own consciousness and become independent of the Manus or the messiahs, patriarchs, whatever it is that you want to call them. And that is called the individualization or the separation of the sexes, because what was happening in the first 2.5 root races was that the Polarians, the way they bred was that they were kind of like a cell that we see today, where one cell would be here and then another cell or another cell breaks off of that cell or a cell and is a copy of that, and then this is how we procreated back in the days. So meaning that we had no sex, we were asexual. We weren't males, nor were we females, and that kind of changed later on, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Right here. During this period, the future humans, who are the members of the animal kingdom with only instinctual consciousness, or hermaphrodites, in other words, they reproduce themselves without the aid of any mate. Thus, hermaphrodite humanity gradually transformed into a sex species over this 3 million year period, which is called the individualization, because at that time, like I said, we didn't have a sex. We were asexual or hermaphrodite and just reproduced on our own. By this time, the process was completed. Its correspondence to the completion of the individualization period 18.6 million years ago in the fifth subrace of the Lemuria, male and female, then started to reproduce the way humans do today. Adam and Eve in the garden represented this separation of the sexes, whilst the eating of the apple was the gaining of consciousness. That eating of the apple was like kind of that spark that that gave us this consciousness that we're beginning to or trying to understand here today. The humanity of that ancient time was enormous because small time periods of 6 to 10,000 years for human development has been assigned by contemporary science. It does not allow sufficient time to entertain the idea that giant humans gradually decreased in size over a period of millions of years in parallel with the reptile kingdom. In other words, in Lemurian times, humans were about the height of dinosaurs. Over the past 20 million years, reptiles and humans have decreased to the size they are today. Now, the way the science looks at it is that humans have always remained the same size as we are today, and everything else has gradually gotten smaller. But they don't give or entertain the idea that humans at one time may have been, like 36 feet tall, 50 feet tall, and as the millions of years progressed and evolution continued, humanity became smaller and smaller, as did the animals that we see, like for instance, the saber-toothed cat or the the mammoths and things like that. Excuse me. The Titans of the Old and the Cyclops legendary three-eyed mortals belong to the fourth Atlantean group race. All the subsequent legends and allegories are found in the Hindu Puranas, the Greek myths, and Homer, based upon hazy reminiscences of real Titan men of superhuman, tremendous physical power, which enabled them to defend themselves and hold at bay gigantic monsters of the geological, Mesozoic, and early Cenozoic times. Now, a lot of these megalithic structures that we have across the world, such as pyramids and monoliths and things like that, it was created by this Lemurian and Atlantean races, which themselves were extremely big, extremely tall, extremely strong, and for them to manhandle 50-ton stones or 100-ton stones was really not all that bad. But not only to mention that, but they also had sound technology which they can use in order to help them move a lot of these stones. Now, a lot of people say that aliens built this, and Egyptology says that tens of thousands of men must have dragged these stones across the desert, which in itself is not correct. This was built by superhumans, which were super big, and it was no problem for them to build these pyramids and things across the planet. In the mythology of ancient Cyclops, the three giants with one eye are said to represent the last three sub-races of that newly conscious Lemurian race at the peak of physical development. In Atlantis, they have been described as towering giants of godly strength and beauty, and the depositories of all the mysteries of heaven and earth. The giants of both Lemuria and Atlantis were able to build large structures and lift enormously heavy slabs of stone, but also had at their disposal technologies that allowed stones weighing many tons to be lifted effortlessly. So they pretty much used sound, which rendered the atoms weightless, and then these stones were able to be moved easily, and then also placed with precision, as we can see down at Ollantaytambo in Peru, where the stones are packed so tight that you couldn't even get a piece of paper or a razor blade in between them. An imperishable record about the gradual evolution of the races has been left for us in the Mayan statues of Afghanistan. They were created during the Atlantean flood when the initiate adepts of the Atlantis were taking refuge in Central Asian mountains. The 5 different sizes of these statues are said to represent the height of the 5 root races in their enormous early etheric stages, and in their later still gigantic and then smaller physical development. Now, you guys may remember this site. It was back in 2001, 2002, right after kind of 9/11 happened, and America went to Afghanistan to take care of the Taliban. And because the Taliban's religious I guess, obsession, they destroyed the statues of the Buddhas and such by using the rockets and grenades and kind of things like that. They tried to destroy them, and in some cases they were they were able to do it, and in some cases some of the statues have been left. Hopefully we can fix these as we progress as a humanity in the future, because that in itself was really a crime, and then to hide our true history. Early Lemurian times, human bodies were gigantic and clumsy, requiring instruction in what we now call Hatha Yoga in order to coordinate the etheric body with the physical. This was the first spiritual goal for humanity and represented the first initiation. So when we look at yoga today, in many forms that it comes in today, its root actually lies with the Lemurians and the giants, because back in those days they were so big that they were clumsy. They were stubbing their toes. They were stepping on things that would injure them. So the best thing for them to do was to learn how to control the avatar, and then through yoga and then through discipline, they were able to control their bodies, and then that stopped stubbing their toes and injuring themselves and things like that. So we can thank the Lemurians for the practice of yoga that we have today. But of course, yoga has evolved into many different forms of yoga. But we need to keep in mind that the origins and the roots of yoga lie in the Lemurian root race from millions and millions and millions of years ago. It was the Atlantean race that two-eye sight evolved over a few million years, replacing the original all-seeing eye of the Lemurians, where there were three-eyed beings in that interim period. Gradually, over the next few million years, as the Atlantean or fourth root race came into the fuller expression in its first few sub-races, this all-seeing eye at the top of the head receded into the brain, where it is remnant. The pineal gland sits today. Two-eye sights represented the development of mind, and in one sense, duality. From one perspective, the Lemurians were far more spiritual, whilst the Atlanteans were deeply immersed in matter. So what they're saying is that when we had the Cyclops, the single-eyed giants, and during the span of 3 million years, and that third eye, which we have today, we say, you have a crusted third eye, or get your third eye activated. Then what we're meaning is a cyclopean third eye, which has gone into our brain, and kind of sits where the pineal gland is. And during that interim period, while our two stereoscopic eyes were coming out or growing, there was three-eyed beings, and we have seen skeletal remains of things like that in images and on YouTube videos. And if you do a Google search, you will come across some things like that. The sixth subrace. Now, this is something that we're going into, pretty shortly, because we're going into this Aquarian age, and that Aquarian age is the beginning of a new age. And in order to start the new age, the old needs to be destroyed, and then hence whatever that's happening on this planet today, politically, warlike, or whatever is happening, there's a big change that's happening, and that change is what's going to lead us into the sixth root race, which a lot of them were now calling star children, indigo children. A lot of us and ourselves are really evolving into that sixth subrace because of the fact, like a lot of people right here in this audience, a lot of us are becoming clairvoyant. Our sixth sense is kicking in. We're beginning to understand what we are and who we are, and that really is an evolution of the mind and of the body to go into the sixth race. This sixth subrace of the Aryan root race will be called the Austro-American subrace, and is believed by Theophysists to be now arising from the Teutonic subrace of the Aryan root race in Australia and in the western United States, meaning Aboriginals. Many individuals of the new subrace will be born in California and its surrounding and nearby areas, i.e. the Austro-American subrace is arising from the Anglo-American, Anglo-Canadian, and Anglo-Australian, and presumably also the Anglo-New Zealander ethnic group. Again, we're going back into the Aboriginal and the Aborigines of of Australia and the Aboriginal groups of North America, because the Aboriginals are actually connected to the Lemurians through genetics, and also the people in India are also connected very closely to the Lemurians. And if we go to Tamil, to Sri Lanka, there's a lot of stories and mythologies that references to them being connected and being related to the Lemurians. And then of course Atlanteans came afterwards, whom Atlantean I guess ancestry or the offshoots of Atlanteans still exist today. A lot of them moved into North America, into Egypt, into Europe, and into Asia. And that's kind of where the megalithic culture began, was through the Atlanteans and also the Lemurians. Lemurians really started, and the Atlanteans really picked up on that. The sixth Austro-American subrace will possess certain psychic powers, and for this, the pituitary body will be developed, thus giving an additional sense that of cognizing astral emotions in the ordinary waking consciousness. Just like what we saw from Melinda earlier, this kind of was going to begin to happen, and it's going to become more frequent and more of a norm as the years progress. And even now, we're beginning to see when we cruise social medias that there's a lot of clairvoyants that are coming about. A lot of people are beginning to discover that they're clairvoyants. Like for instance, like Rob, he's beginning to practice tarot cards, and through that, the clairvoyance is being built. So this is kind of connected to the sixth subrace that I'm talking about. We may say that in general, the sixth subrace will bring in wisdom and intuition, blending all that is best in the intelligence of the fifth subrace and the emotion of the fourth race. Now, right now in this fifth race that we're at, we're very five sense people. We very emotional, very dense energies that we have to deal with almost on a daily basis. But as time moves forward and we begin to evolve into this sixth race, a lot of that is going to become a lot easier and easier. A lot of these emotions are going to become easier to deal with. And a lot of us are going to become clairvoyants and telepathically aware and begin to communicate not only with one another, but also with the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom. And that's already beginning to happen. There's a lot of people on this planet who are able to speak to animals and also to the plant kingdom. So we're already progressing into that next subrace. Now, the last seventh race will have a spiritual deity or a Buddha, for example, a Manu or a patriarch, as every one of his predecessors had, but its adepts will be far higher than any of the present race. For among them will abide the future planetary, the Dayan Kohan, whose duty it will be to instruct or refresh the memory of the first race of the fifth round men after this planet's future obscursion. What that means is that when the next Manu comes or the next patriarch comes, and a lot of people are going to be guided by this individual, and he's going to remind them telepathically about the previous subraces and the root races that have existed, and the experiences and the memories of those races will be downloaded into the seventh race, and then they're going to be able to remember everything. Just like when we come here today, when we incarnate onto the planet, we forget where we come from, and which is part of the program for now, because that's part of the evolution of consciousness. But when the seventh subrace comes in, there's not that memory is not going to be lost. They're going to remember everything, because this is a culmination of a cycle from point A to point B, and then we're going to become a very aware, highly conscious, and the Earth will be evolved into a very highly conscious form of a being, and will be able to adapt and then co-adapt and coexist together without any problems that we are having today. Like for instance, we're doing mass logging, mass fishing, mass mining. Things like that are not going to happen when the seventh subrace begins, because there's not going to be any need for that, because we'll be able to manifest a lot of the things that we need just surely through the power of our thought and with our mind. The seventh root race, humanity, will fuse mind intuition with Atma, the inner self, the inner spiritual self, and will then be able to function consciously as the higher self, the spiritual triad of Atma, Buddha, and the Manas. The development and advancement will, in far distant future, eventually come about naturally for humanity. Now, the seventh race is not going to happen for like another few million years, but there's a huge timeline in between, the sub races and the development of that sub race, and then the destruction of the sub race or the destruction of the planet in order for the new sub race to come in. So there's going to be a period of cleaning. So this is not going to happen for quite a while time still. We are currently only halfway through the progress of our planetary scheme, and that the majestic climax and ultimate apotheosis of humanity is not destined to occur until the end of the seventh root race of the seventh round of the seventh globe of the seventh chain, billions of years from now. Now, we can easily see that the end is nowhere in sight for the human race, and the world would not be destroyed despite the multitude of doomsayers who insist that it will. People have been saying the world is going to end for many, many, many thousands of years. The rapture is going to happen, or something's the doomsday or Armageddon, things like that. Is just fear mongering and is creating dense energy for people, and thus we continue to stay in this dense form that we are because of the propaganda that we've been fed. Now, if we're given positive reinforcements, then this process can be fastened a little bit, but not too much, because it's all part of that divine plan. It's part of the evolutionary process of this human consciousness, which in itself is a hive mind, and that hive mind will evolve into a higher state of being, and once it gets into the higher state of being, it will travel through the higher planes of existence and the different dimensional realms that exist. For instance, like people channel, guys like Ra or Seth, those are hive minds, and one day humanity will become a hive mind like that. And when there's a next form of humanity or another culture that is evolving into a higher form of consciousness, maybe they will be able to connect with humans, and humans will be able to channel material to those individuals or to that race of people for them to evolve their consciousness to the level where humanity will be at that time. Any apparent end is merely a new beginning, and the divine plan and purpose shall carry, and unabated as the endless ages roll on. At the end of the seventh root race trumpet, the human period of activity on Earth will cease. The lower principle of the Earth chain will die and disintegrate. A long planetary period of rest will begin. The human life wave will then transfer to Mars, which is the globe E. Now, the Mars is the next evolution for humanity. So when this, now my hypothesis is that the previous humanity that existed on Mars, and then when the next humanity started, which we're talking about right now, right here today, from 175 million years ago, evolved here on Earth, and then when the next form of humanity begins, that will begin on Mars. And Mars is going through a destructive period right now because the old is being destroyed and the process for the new is being built. That's why Mars seems to be in the in the shape that it is today. After this period of nirvana, we shall become the guides of humanity and lower entities on the next embodiment of the Earth chain. Like I was saying, people will be able to channel us, and then through that channeling, we will be able to guide them and then give them the information that they need in order for them to reach their full potential of higher consciousness. Just as we've been given through Manus and Messiahs and the patriarchs and kind of what have you, that we've, prophets and things like that have guided humanity through a higher form of consciousness to where we are today. So that is my presentation, guys. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And in conclusion, the periods of let me come down here to my conclusion. Similar to modern literature, the masters have also sometimes used this yuga measured as thousands of years and other times as millions of years. There's no explanation that I found to explain the differences clearly and without a doubt. Man evolved both in soul and physical body over an extremely long length of time, many millions and millions and millions of years. And one used the length of time and the millions of years as the length of time of the yugas, then the explanation of it seems very reasonable and matches closely modern anthropology and genealogy. And that's pretty much it, my man. And any questions out there, I will be happy to take any. That was a piece of, now when and within this, see, root races are extremely complex because of the fact that there is the globe, and within the globe there are 7 more globes, and within those globes there are schemes, and within those schemes there are other plans, and there's other parallel planets and globes that are happening. So it's the I would say the solar system, and within the solar system, and within the solar system, it's timed by 347 and then 4,620, and it gets very, very deep. So what I give you today is just a basic a beginner learning lesson into what forms of humanity has existed on this planet and how we evolved into the point where we are today. As I was mentioning earlier, the Polarians and the Hyperboreans and the first half of the Lemurian root races, they really were etherical in their bodies, meaning that they were light body. Now this kind of really goes back to what the Gnostics talk about in Christianity, where they say that the humans at one time had a light body. What they're referring to is to the previous root races of the Polarians and the Hyperboreans and the first half of the Lemurians. And then, and then of course we have legends that are in our mythology of Cyclops and 3-eyed people and 1-eyed people and things like that. So when we're looking into history like this, and then we begin to understand the true nature of humanity, the discovery of truth really helps us to, expand our own awareness and our own, self-awareness of where we come from and what we are, because we've been made to think that humanity has been in this form, this current form, and that's how we've always been because we evolved from a monkey. Now, in the secret doctrine, the fact is that humans did not evolve from the monkeys. Monkeys, in fact, evolved from humans because in the previous subrace, there was a crime that was committed, and that crime was that the human at that time began mating with the animal kingdom, and the consequence of that mating is the primate that we have today. And that primate today is the consequence of that mating. Now, because that is a lower dense, lower being, a lower thinking brain, lower brain thinking, and that's where the whole idea of us comes from, is where we are told that we evolved from monkeys and that we use 10% of our brain, which in fact is actually the other way around. Monkeys evolved from us, and that monkeys actually use about 5 to 10% of their brain. But we can even go further with the 10% usage of the brain, because that really comes from the guy, what's his name, that famous psychologist. Rob, do you remember his name?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
Yeah, maybe somebody in the crowd knows. That famous psychologist. Anyways, he was approached by another scientist, and they were talking about the human brain and the condition of the brain, and what the statement was, what this guy told Sigmund Freud, that was his name. And
yes.
what he told Sigmund Freud was that we only understand about 10% of our brain, and from that point forward, the mainstream media of the time and the mainstream of today has really followed that and really has reversed that idea, that instead of us only understanding 10% of our brain, we use an entire, we don't understand our entire brain, and that we only understand about 10% of it. And that's where that whole thing comes from. So that being said, this is my presentation. Rob, you got any questions for me?
We do have a question out here from Jacob Waters. He says, Omar, does some of your work depict the old ages people lived to? 600 plus years is seen in the Old Testament and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I should have mentioned this in my presentation, which I did actually, but when my computer died, I had to reset and get a new one and all that stuff, so I lost a lot of information. But back in the day, people did live for an indefinite period of time. Like, for instance, the Polarians, they lived an indefinite period of time, and when they were complete with their experience here on Earth, they just willed themselves to die. And that kind of stayed in place until the Lemurians came around. And when the Lemurians came around, the age span considerably dropped for those people. Instead of living an indefinite period of time, they lived 100,000 years or 500,000 years. And then as time progressed, and then we got into other root races such as the Atlanteans, which lived for several thousand years. And then when we got into our current state of humans that we are today in the fifth race, like the patriarchs Noah and such, that lived for like 900 years, 800 years, 700 years, is the remnants and connected to the old of the Lemurian and the Polarians and the Hyperbaryans. And then, of course, here we are today with our lifespan really cut short anywhere between 80 to 120 years, which began really with Moses, our patriarch that led us into the state that we are today. Right, he was one of the first Manus, or one of the Manus, or the patriarchs, or messiahs, or whatever you want to call him, for the fifth race. But again, I would have to insist that whatever's happening to us today, our age has been decreased by an extraterrestrial influence. And the question that I'd asked Rob to ask Melinda about the Archons are the ones that are the shadow people, the very dense form of energy which exists beyond our visual perceptual range, because they vibrate at a different vibration, so that we can't see them, and they have this ability to change their vibrational distortion so that they can become visible to us and they can go invisible to us. And what these people have done over the course of last several thousand years is that they've interfered with humanity by abducting our women, which most cases are hereditary, and through that they've increased or enlarged our reptilian brain, which is the oldest part of our brain, which is in the fight or flight mode, which says, hey, you either fight or you run away. They've increased that aspect of our brain, and really cut our lifespan short down to 80 to 120 years, so that it becomes a rotating door of incarnation. Because if you have people living here on the world that are like 700, 800, 900 years old, after 700, 800, 900 years old, you will attain a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom, and through that wisdom, you'll be vibrating at a very high distortion, so your awareness and your consciousness will be very high. So what these things have done by shortening our lifespan is that we don't have that ability or that chance to get all that information and all that wisdom to raise ourselves in that vibrational consciousness form. So just as we begin to reach that higher form of consciousness, our avatar expires, and then we have to reincarnate, come back, do it all over again, and do it all over again. It becomes that recycling door. And then what that recycling door is doing is that it's creating that very dense energy from us, because of this daily grind that we're all involved in, and this false information that we've all been presented with, that creates dense energy. And what these things do is that they umbilically attach themselves to you, and they begin to feed off of that energy, and then they become that third voice in your head where they say, you can't do this, something bad's going to happen, you're a loser, or don't try that because you're going to fail. Things like that that's happening in your mind. That voice is that archonic voice that's telling you these things to make you vibrate at a dense level so that it drops you. And when you drop, you create that dense hateful energy, and that is the energy which it feeds off of. So this archonic force is the one that's responsible for the state that we are in today. So to answer your question, yeah, our ages of our patriarchs were related to the old, but unfortunately that changed over the course of the last 10,000 years or so when Atlantis went down. And when that big war that happened, that we read about in the Mahabharata and the Ramayanas, and the epics and the poems and the Homers, the Iliads, and all those, when we're seeing the wars that are happening, that war that's being spoken of, which the Atlanteans lost, was to this archonic alien force that came into our universe, or not into our universe, but into our solar system, and weaponized our solar system. And that's a whole other thing that I really don't want to get into, because it's not connected to this, but kind of somewhat is connected to this. But we'll talk about that at another time. But this is kind of what we're dealing with now. When we get into the Tower of Babel, like when I was saying that the earlier sub races and root races, they had the ability to clairvoyantly and telepathically communicate with one another, not only with one another but also to the animal kingdom and also to the plant kingdom. The Tower of Babel is a metaphorically speaking of the severness when our consciousness was severed, or our connection to one another was canceled out, and then thus the confusing of the tongues. The confusing of the tongues was that when we were telepathically connected, we were speaking one universal language, which was the language of thought, because we transferred our information via thought. But when that confusion of language, when that when that link was cut, that confusion of tongues was based on the regional dialects that each and every single one of us physically spoke. Because not only did we, we're multilingual, so to say, where we have the ability to telepathically communicate, but not only can we telepathically communicate and make a long distance phone call through our mind, but in our own communities, we physically spoke our languages like English and Arabic and things like that. And then when we could no longer consciously speak to one another, then that's where the confusion happened. And when that confusion happened, the density happened. The density happened because we could no longer share our ideas and our thoughts with one another, and that created animosity and misunderstanding between us. And when that misunderstanding happened between us, that caused wars and things like that, which again created even denser energy, and that dense energy was being fed off of, because we're being reared like chickens, as we rear chickens for food. We're being reared in the very, very same fashion, but we just simply don't understand it because of the fact that this truth and this information has not been taught to everyone or to all of us. And even when we look at our holy books, like the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Quran, the Popol Vuh, all the holy books across the planet, they're encoded esoterically, where when you read it, it gives you one message, but when you esoterically decode that, then it's giving you a totally different information. And that information is for the initiates, people who may become priests, or are going into secret societies, things like that. But thankfully, a lot of us researchers in our community are beginning to understand that, and thus hence why we're doing information sessions and presentations such as we're doing now, to get this information out there so that people begin to understand the true history. Because if we don't if we don't understand where we come from, then we're doomed to make the same mistakes over and over again, and we're going to be stuck in this repetitious cycle. Because what's happening is that the sixth race that's coming up is being sabotaged by the fact of the fifth race being put into the disposition that we're in today. Now imagine if 10,000 years ago, had we not lost the war to this archonic force, the human mind and the consciousness of humanity would be evolved to a point where we would be in that sixth sub-race right now, where we wouldn't be communicating on a platform like this. We would just simply connect with our minds, and we would be able to transfer that information to one another, and we would be at a far higher level. than what we currently are. But you know what? Like I always say, shit happens, and and this is part of that evolutionary period where we get knocked down, and the best thing for us to do is wipe ourselves off, stand up, and then keep moving forward and be progressive with our evolution.
Absolutely. And one of the great things was, I was going to ask you a question, you answered it going through it, and I think we're like almost telepathically linked together. So my question is gone. But it's one of those things that we say all the time: a man who doesn't know where it comes from is a man lost. And that's why this information is so imperative, because to re-evolve to where we are, from where we are now, we're de-evolved from where we were. But to re-evolve, we have to understand that history to get back to that pivotal moment where we can endure what is going on and get ourselves, our own avatars, back up to snuff. It's really where we're at a disadvantage now. We shouldn't be. That's why
Yeah,
it's so important, this information. And that was an
yeah.
amazing presentation, by the way.
Thank
I was like riveted. I'm sitting there like, okay, like following along. Like I was reading with you too, so I was like looking at the pictures, but it was enthralling for sure. It was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, man. And I think what's happening now is that the more information that comes out about shadow people and the archonic people, or whatever labels you want to give them, we are beginning to realize them, and we are beginning to understand them. Maybe not collectively across the world, but a lot of us in our community, in the arena that we're in, are beginning to understand this this philosophy and this idea of this being that's invisible to us, but we are visible to it, and that is feeding off of our energy. And because we're becoming aware of it, that gives us another tool in our toolbox to help fight it, right? Because when we fight it and when we understand it, then what will happen is that we raise our awareness, and when we raise our awareness, its umbilical cord that's attached to us will detach. And when that detaches, then we become a sovereign being again. And then when we become sovereign, then then we begin to get a lot of these gifts that are going around today. Like a lot of people are becoming clairvoyant. Like you, for instance, Rob. Tarot card reading, people think is just picking up a card, reading it, and then just giving an idea of what that means, but not really. There's a lot of clairvoyance involved with it. You have to tap into a person's energy. You have to tap into that person's thought. So that is like one example of this, future that we're going into. A lot of these children that are being born today, that we call indigo children or star children, have a lot of these capabilities and these gifts that that they're growing up with. A lot of these kids are remembering where they're coming from, right? And that is like one of the key things, because we, in our current state, we don't remember our conscious state on why we came here to Earth, why we decided to incarnate into this avatar. But a lot of these children that are being born today clearly, totally understand that. Now, when I say a lot of these children, I literally mean every single one of these children right across the planet is almost a star child, because from every single home, from every single parent, from right across the world, we're hearing one thing consistently: my child is so smart. My child is speaking before me. My child was cooking before me. My child was walking before I did. My child knows things that I don't know. How does my child know this? Why is my child so empathetic? You're hearing a lot of this throughout the entire world, and that's a very good, clear indication that we are going into that second or that sixth root race of humanity and evolving. And and then that kind of correlates also with the paradigm shift that we've been talking about, that Stephen and Evan are probably going to talk about a little bit later when it comes to Uluru, and this paradigm shift that's happening, this energetic shift that's happening. And in fact, we did an event with that, Rob, Clarence, myself, and Greg back in December, where we had our global meditation event. And through that event, we were able to reach 15 million people. And through that 15 million people, the consciousness and elevation of consciousness has happened, right? So I'm sure they're going to touch on this a little bit later, so I'm not really going to touch on that myself, because it has while it does have something to do with the races, but it doesn't.
Right. We're going to bring in Clarence and Greg too.
Topic here.
Well, that's okay. It is what it is. I think that whatever we're talking about is completely relevant and it's all connected. So it's never really off topic.